My name is Elias. I was 28 years old the night my adoptive parents rented out the glass-walled boardroom of the Apex Club to fire me from my own life. Evelyn, the woman who had demanded I call her mother since I was 10, wore an emerald silk dress she reserved for hostile takeovers and charity galas. Arthur, my adoptive father, sat at the head of the mahogany table, already sliding a thick, leather-bound portfolio toward my empty dinner plate. They had just informed me with the sterile precision of an HR department that my role within the family structure was being eliminated. They were selling the family architecture and development firm, the firm I had functionally run for 6 years, and I was being severed from the company, the family trust, and their lives. They had a check waiting for me, provided I signed an ironclad non-disclosure agreement and walked away quietly. I didn't yell. I didn't shatter my wine glass against the panoramic window overlooking the Chicago skyline. I just sat there, listening to the hum of the air conditioning, looking at the two people who had purchased my childhood. But there was a fatal flaw in their blueprint, a structural defect they couldn't possibly have seen coming. 8 months before this dinner, I had found my biological sister, and as Arthur tapped his platinum pen against the contract, urging me to sign, my real family was waiting in the lobby 30 floors below us, holding a crushed, homemade velvet cake in a cardboard box. If you have ever been treated like an appliance in your own home, kept around only as long as you were producing value, fixing problems, or carrying the weight for people who never asked how heavy it was, this story is for you. Welcome to a space where we talk about the architecture of human relationships, the courage it takes to demolish a toxic foundation, and the beauty of finally building a home with people who just want you inside it. Leave a comment below if you've ever had to walk away from people who confused love with utility, and make sure you subscribe. To understand what happened in that glass room, you have to understand the math of the Sterling household. Arthur and Evelyn Sterling did not adopt me because they had an abundance of love to give. They adopted me because Arthur was a sharp, ruthless property developer, and I was a 10-year-old math prodigy rotting in a group home who had a preternatural obsession with structural engineering. They already had a biological son, Trent, who was 3 years older than me. Trent was the heir. I was the investment. I realized the difference early on. When Trent turned 16, he was given a brand new silver coupe with a bow on the hood and a massive party at the country club. When I turned 16, Arthur handed me a roll of commercial blueprints, a cup of black coffee, and told me that if I found the stress load errors in the schematic by midnight, I could have the weekend off. Affection in the Sterling house was a bonus paid out for high performance. If I designed a structural support that saved the company $50,000 on a build, Evelyn would touch my shoulder and call me her brilliant boy. If I was tired or sick or quiet, I ceased to exist. I was a load-bearing column in their lives. You don't hug a column. You don't ask a column how its day was. You just expect it to hold up the roof. I internalized this. I became the perfect machine. By the time I was 22, I had my master's degree. By 24, I was the lead structural engineer for Sterling Innovations. Trent, meanwhile, was given the title of vice president, despite the fact that he spent his days playing golf and expensing 3 martini lunches. I did the work. Trent's name went on the press releases. I told myself this was simply the cost of my rescue. They had pulled me out of the foster system. They had put a roof over my head. The least I could do was carry their empire on my back. But there was one person in the company who saw me, Marcus. Marcus was Arthur's original business partner, an old-school, gruff architect who smelled of drafting graphite and peppermint. Marcus was the only adult who ever asked me if I was happy. When I was a teenager, working late in the office while the Sterlings were vacationing in Aspen, Marcus would order pizza, roll up his sleeves, and teach me the philosophy of building. A structure only holds if the foundation is honest, Eli, Marcus would tell me, tapping a rolled-up schematic against my chest. You can dress up a building in all the Italian marble you want. If the foundation is built on sand, the house is a lie. Don't build your life on sand. When Marcus passed away when I was 26, I was devastated.
The Sterlings barely attended the funeral. But 3 weeks later, Marcus's private attorney called me into his office. Marcus had left me something in his will, something he had quietly kept out of the Sterling Company portfolio for decades, anticipating exactly what Arthur would eventually become. I didn't tell Arthur what Marcus left me. I filed it away in a safe deposit box, a quiet memory of an old man who loved me. I thought I would never need it. I was wrong. The shift began in the spring, right around my 28th birthday. It wasn't a sudden explosion, it was a slow, coordinated freezing out. Company emails that usually copied me started bypassing my inbox. Arthur stopped asking for my input on the new waterfront development project. Evelyn, who usually invited me to Sunday dinners just to show me off to her socialite friends, stopped calling entirely. Then came the rumors. Sterling Innovations was being targeted for a massive corporate buyout by an international conglomerate. The buyout would make Arthur and Evelyn obscenely wealthy, and Trent was being positioned for a golden parachute. My name was nowhere in the acquisition documents. My analytical brain immediately started running the numbers. Families drift, yes, but corporate entities do not drift, they maneuver. The Sterlings were cleaning house. They wanted to sell the empire I had built for them, and they needed to sever my legal ties to the family and the firm, so I couldn't claim a single percentage of the sale.
When Evelyn called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice dripping with a synthetic warmth I hadn't heard in months, I felt the temperature in my office drop 10 degrees. "Elias, darling," she cooed, "Arthur and I want to celebrate your birthday properly. We've booked the private boardroom at the Apex Club this Friday, just the four of us. We have some wonderful family milestones to discuss." Every survival instinct I had honed in the foster system screamed at me. A predatory chill ran down my spine. The cruelty of people like Evelyn isn't in their shouting, it's in their logistics. She was framing my execution as a birthday party. I smiled into the phone. "I'll be there, Evelyn. Thank you." I hung up, walked over to my drafting table, and stared at the Chicago skyline. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my place in their family. I had traded my youth, my peace, and my brilliance for the illusion of their love. And they were going to slip a knife into my ribs over an appetizer course. But they didn't know about Clara. 8 months before this phone call, a letter had arrived in my mailbox, a battered, handwritten envelope. I had submitted my DNA to an ancestry registry years ago during a lonely holiday weekend, never expecting a hit. But the database found a match, an older sister. Her name was Clara. She was 5 years older than me. When we were separated in the system, she had begged to keep me, but she was a teenager and I was a toddler. The state tore us apart. She had spent the last decade searching for me. We met at a crowded diner on the south side of the city. I wore a tailored suit, she wore a faded yellow cardigan. When she saw me, she didn't shake my hand. She burst into tears, wrapped her arms around me, and held on to me as if I was the only solid thing in the universe. "I've got you," she kept whispering into my shoulder, right there in the middle of the diner. "I finally found you. I'm never letting you go again."
Over the next 8 months, I learned what an honest foundation actually looked like. Clara was a public school teacher, married to a paramedic named David. They had 2 little boys who treated me like a human jungle gym. Their house was tiny, chaotic, loud, and smelled like burnt toast and laundry detergent. They never asked me for a dime. They never asked me to fix their roof or review their finances or leverage my connections. When I tried to buy my nephews expensive gifts to earn my welcome, Clara gently slid the gifts back across the table. "Eli," she said softly, touching my cheek, "you don't have to pay rent here. You're my brother. We just want you." I had to excuse myself to the bathroom and lock the door so they wouldn't hear me sobbing against the sink. For 28 years, I had been an asset, a tool. To Clara, I was just a human being. I was wanted, not needed. Wanted. The profound terror of that realization nearly broke me, and then it rebuilt me. So when Evelyn Sterling invited me to my corporate execution, I didn't panic. I didn't hire a defense lawyer. I simply went to my safe deposit box, retrieved 3 specific documents, and placed them in a sleek black leather folder. Then I called Clara. "They're doing it tonight," I told her over the phone. "Do you want me to come up there and flip the table?" she asked fiercely. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "No, but I do want you to wait for me in the lobby of the Apex building around 8 o'clock. "We'll be there, Eli. Whatever happens up there, you walk back down to us." When I stepped off the private elevator into the glass-walled boardroom of the Apex Club, the table was set for 4: Arthur, Evelyn, and Trent. Trent was already swirling a glass of scotch, looking at me with the smug, lazy grin of a prince who knows the peasant is about to be banished. Arthur checked his gold watch. Evelyn stood and offered me a hollow air kiss on the cheek. "Elias, sit, please," Arthur commanded, bypassing any birthday pleasantries. I sat. I placed my black leather folder precisely parallel to my water glass. "We'll skip the small talk," Arthur said, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. "You're a practical man, Elias. You understand how business works. The firm is evolving. We are in the final stages of an acquisition by the Vanguard Group. It's a new era." "And you don't fit the new corporate structure," Trent chimed in, unable to hide his glee. "Nothing personal, little brother." "We've provided for you, of course," Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a register of feigned maternal sorrow. "We gave you an incredible life, Elias, an education, a home. We rescued you from a very dark future. But families grow, and sometimes paths diverge. It is time for you to forge your own way." Arthur slid the thick legal portfolio across the polished wood. It stopped exactly 1 inch from my plate. "This is a comprehensive severance and separation agreement. It legally severs your ties to the Sterling Trust Fund, removes your name from the firm's partnership track, and waives any claim to the Vanguard acquisition capital. In exchange, we are offering you a lump sum of $200,000, a generous head start." $200,000 for a company valued at $80 million. A company that I had designed, structured, and expanded. "Sign the waiver, Elias," Arthur said, uncapping his pen and holding it out to me. "We can make this clean. You take the money, you start your own little firm, and we part as friends." I looked at the pen. I looked at Trent's smirking face. I looked at Evelyn, who was watching me with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a rat in a maze. I didn't feel angry. I felt an overwhelming, transcendent peace. "Arthur," I said, my voice quiet, smooth, and perfectly calibrated, "have you finalized the asset disclosures for Vanguard yet?" Arthur frowned, clearly derailed by the technical question. "That is none of your concern. The deal closes on Monday. Now sign the—" "I'm asking," I interrupted, resting my hands flat on the table, because I reviewed the Vanguard acquisition parameters. Vanguard is buying Sterling Innovations specifically for our eco-sustainable infrastructure contracts, specifically the patent for the zero-carbon retaining concrete. Am I right? Trent rolled his eyes. Yes, genius. That's the crown jewel. What's your point? I didn't look at Trent. I kept my eyes locked on Arthur.
My point, Arthur, is that you can't sell a house if you don't own the foundation. I reached for my black leather folder. I opened it calmly and extracted the 3 documents I had retrieved from the bank. I slid them across the mahogany table, mirroring the exact trajectory of his severance package. Arthur's eyes flicked down. Evelyn leaned in. "What is this?" Arthur snapped. "That," I said softly, "is the patent registry for the zero-carbon retaining concrete. You'll notice the registered owner is not Sterling Innovations. The registered owner is Marcus Vance. And beneath that is the transfer deed Marcus executed 3 weeks before he died." I watched Arthur's eyes scan the page. I watched his brain hit a brick wall at 200 miles an hour. "Marcus knew you would eventually do exactly this," I explained, my voice steady in a silent room. "So he patented the formula under his private holding company. He licensed it to Sterling Innovations for a nominal fee, revocable at any time. And when he died, he left the patents, the holding company, and the land our manufacturing plant sits on to me." The color completely vanished from Arthur's face. He looked like a man who had just stepped out of an airplane and realized he forgot his parachute. "You don't own the tech, Arthur. I do. You don't own the ground the plant is built on. I do. Vanguard isn't paying $80 million for your corporate letterhead. They're paying for my concrete. And without my signature, your company is an empty shell." You stole it," Trent stammered, standing up, his scotch spilling onto the table. "He stole it, Dad!"
"Shut up, Trent," Arthur hissed, his voice trembling. He looked at me, truly looked at me, as if seeing an apex predator sitting at his dinner table. "Elias, what have you done?" "I performed a stress test on our relationship, and the foundation failed." Evelyn, desperate, realizing that her multi-million-dollar payout was currently evaporating into the conditioned air, reached across the table. The icy facade cracked, replaced by a frantic, sickening warmth. "Elias, sweetheart," she breathed, tears springing to her eyes with theatrical perfection. "Please, we're your family. We took you in. We loved you like our own. You wouldn't do this to your mother." I looked at her hand, hovering over the table, waiting for me to take it. "You didn't adopt a son, Evelyn. You hired a contractor, and my contract is up." I stood up from the table. I buttoned my suit jacket. "You want the Vanguard deal to go through?" I asked, looking down at Arthur. "Have your lawyers call mine on Monday. I'll lease you the patents for 60% of the total acquisition price. You can keep the rest. Consider it a refund for my childhood." "You ungrateful bastard!" Arthur roared, slamming his fists onto the table, the illusion of the sophisticated businessman entirely shattered. "We gave you everything. We made you who you are." "No," I said, walking toward the glass doors. "I just gave me a place to work. I built myself." I didn't wait for his response. I pushed through the glass doors and walked to the elevator. Behind me, I could hear the muffled sounds of chaos, Trent yelling, Evelyn weeping, Arthur throwing a glass against the wall. It was the sound of a hollow structure finally collapsing under its own weight. The elevator descended 30 floors in silence. I watched the numbers tick down. 20, 15, 10, 5. With every floor, a ghost left my body. The ghost of the boy who thought he had to earn his dinner. The ghost of the teenager who thought love was a transaction.
By the time the doors opened into the grand marble lobby of the Apex building, I felt lighter than air. I walked out into the lobby, and there they were. Clara was sitting on a velvet sofa, wearing her yellow cardigan. David was beside her, holding my youngest nephew, while the older one was spinning in circles on the marble floor. Resting on the coffee table in front of them was a white cardboard bakery box. Clara looked up. She saw my face. She stood up instantly, leaving her purse behind, and walked toward me. She didn't ask how the negotiation went. She didn't ask about the money or the patents or the company. She just reached up, framed my face in her hands, and smiled. "Happy birthday, little brother," she whispered. "Did you bring the cake?" I asked, my voice cracking for the first time all night. David walked over holding the cardboard box. "We dropped it twice on the train," he laughed. "It's a structural disaster, but it tastes good." "Structural disasters are my specialty," I said. We didn't go to a fancy restaurant. We walked out of the Apex building, took the subway back to the south side, and sat around Clara's battered wooden kitchen table. We ate squashed velvet cake off paper plates. My nephews sang Happy Birthday at the top of their lungs, entirely off-key.
I didn't have to analyze any blueprints. I didn't have to calculate my worth. I just sat in a chair, ate my cake, and existed. The Sterlings signed the deal on my terms 3 weeks later. They took the remaining millions and retired to a gated community in Florida, furious and defeated. Trent was fired by Vanguard 3 months after the acquisition. I took my share of the capital, walked away from corporate architecture, and started a small firm that builds affordable, sustainable housing for the foster care system. People think that walking away from toxic family requires explosive anger. It doesn't. Anger means you still want them to understand. Anger means you are still negotiating for your worth. True freedom is quiet. It is the profound, unshakable realization that your worth is not a variable in someone else's equation. If you are currently twisting yourself into knots, trying to be useful enough, perfect enough, or compliant enough to earn a seat at a table where you are only valued for what you produce, stop. Pack up your tools, walk out of the room. You cannot build a safe home with people who view you as raw material. Save your bricks for the people who are waiting in the lobby, holding a squashed cake, loving you simply because you are there. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, type the word foundation in the comments. Keep building, keep breathing, and I'll see you in the next video.